I want to invite you to build a world with me. Because the world that I live in was designed and built for you. The timeline for disability inclusion hasn't been linear, and it differs by jurisdiction and where you are in the world. The medical model, which was the first phase of disability, is in the lived experience for many of us. In this era, people were defined by their medical condition. A stigma was attached to them and often whispered in communities and in families. The solution was to take disabled people out of their homes, to frame them as burdens on their families and communities, and to put them in care homes and institutions. In that time, we then built a world as our economies and democracies grew, never once asking disabled people about their needs or accommodations. Gradually, our thinking changed. We created structures to bring disabled people back into communities and homes, but we did it through a lens of charity. The challenge with that is by rooting it in charity, we offer independence with generosity, not with rights or dignity. With the UN Convention on the Rights of Peoples with Disabilities, those rights are now protected. And disability representation is beginning to be measurable and quantifiable, but action and conversation, they're often hindered because we don't know what to say, when to say it, and out of fear of causing offence or saying the wrong thing, we say nothing at all. So let's have a conversation. My name is Sinéad Burke. I'm an Irish educator and a disabled woman. Disability can be visible or invisible. It can be inherited, like mine, or it can be acquired. It can be permanent, like mine, or it can be temporary. Disability spans from physical to learning disabilities, to chronic illness, to disease, to addiction and mental illness, to autism, and to being deaf or blind. The disability population is over 1 billion people, and with a pandemic, and thankfully an aging population, our community is only growing. And after all, we are all only temporarily non-disabled. I have achondroplasia, which is the most common form of dwarfism, and the language that I'm most comfortable with is little person. That's how I describe myself. I am incredibly proud to be disabled. Disabled and disability are not bad words. They fill me with pride and a real sense of community. My disability is one of my identities that define me. In the same way of being Irish, being a woman, and being white. These things shape my expertise and interests, and it frames my perspective on the world. Your identities shape who you are too. But what do we miss out on when we only design places and spaces for the few? Well, ideas, innovation, problem-solving, perspective, and people. I'll give you an example. There is a mapping software that most of us use almost every day. You and I are physically different. But if we ask the app to map our journey with the same starting point and finishing point, it will preempt the same walking time. For you and me, that's kind of wild because they have access to data and information stored on my phone that measures my gait, my height, my weight, my average walking speed, and the number of average steps that I complete each day. In a data-centric era, why are they not using that information to amend the algorithm and say, hey, Sinead, do you fancy a coffee? It's 4:00. If you want to walk to get a coffee, the closest shop is about 24 minutes away from you. But if you send your brother, he'll get there by walking in 15 minutes. That innovation could go further. As I'm on my way, that map could highlight the coffee shops that are most physically accessible, offering the coffee shop 100% conversion rates. The engineers aren't deliberately trying to limit my access to caffeine. They just don't think about these things. because they don't have to. But the disabled market has a value of 1.7 trillion US dollars per year. And if you add in the discretionary income of their family and friends, people who are going to be influenced by work around inclusion and accessibility, that's approximately 8 trillion US dollars per year. We're missing out on opportunities to build better businesses, to create more inclusive solutions, and to design more equitable societies. But with so much to do, it can feel overwhelming. So where do we begin? In your storytelling, I'd like you to practice asking a simple question. Who is not in the room? Meaning, whose perspectives haven't been considered and what identities are not being reflected in your campaigns, in front and behind the camera. Visibility and representation have power. In 2019, I got to be the first little person to be on the cover of Vogue. Photographed by Peter Lindbergh, the image personified strength, dignity, and power. A new narrative for a body like mine. Walking past the newsstands and seeing that cover, it's a feeling that even now I find difficult to articulate. But the best parts came in the days and weeks afterwards, when parents and disabled adults sent me photographs of themselves clutching the magazine and telling me that they now believed that they could do and be anything. Being a conduit for their dreams is a privilege, but it's a role we can each play. Asking who is not in the room and finding ways to bring those voices and perspectives to the table creates meaningful campaigns, accurate representation, and better innovation in the products we design. It also pushes us towards a more equitable world where people feel safe and proud just to be themselves. That's a responsibility we each hold. But what does it look like in action? I was aware of the work that Pinterest was doing around inclusion because I myself am a pinner, and they've been doing such amazing things, particularly around skin tone features and increasing visibility and representation for pinners on the platform. So when we began talking about this event, I felt comfortable asking them about how they were considering accessibility. The response was refreshing. They explained that they would have captions, which is a step that so many often forget, but they asked me what they were missing and if we could work together to design this space to be more accessible for all of you. They invited me to the table, asked me to co-design with them, and provided the resources to preempt success. We began with your invitation. We asked you if you had any specific accessibility accommodations. Did you notice? We also made an internal commitment as to how these accommodations could be met. The design team considered the colour contrast in the branding, ensuring that those who are blind or have low vision could participate. We engaged with the event production team, mapping out if we needed to change the platform to ensure that captioning and sign language interpretation were possible. We spoke with wider teams at Pinterest to ensure that accessibility wasn't something that we considered just for today. But how do we evolve it and implement it in the company workflow? How do we use Pinterest's influence and learning to help guide you? We have some ideas, and today we're going to show you a board that we have been creating, a resource that's a starting point for you, your work, and your business. But we're not giving it to you. We want you to design it with us. What have you learned? How can you add to it? Because accessibility is an adventure that requires a commitment to learning and improving constantly. This approach that we're taking is right, but it's radical because often when I suggest including a sign language interpreter, the response is, but there's no one deaf in the audience. And there never will be. We need to transform our culture and our practices to fit disabled people. We have to include them in the process and design the world with them. But how can you do it? I believe that there are 5 steps. Awareness, advocacy, policy, culture, and system. Not very catchy. But grow your awareness and education surrounding disability and accessibility. Follow disabled advocates online, read books and articles written by disabled people, listen to their podcasts, change your vocabulary, and begin to instigate conversations. Remembering that language is personal and political. To build your experience as an advocate, begin asking questions and try to build solutions. Next time you visit a restaurant, when making the booking, ask if the premises is accessible. If they say yes, ask for further details like, does it have a step-free entrance? Or is the accessible entrance down a dark alley and technically it's the service entrance? Ask if the menu is available in different formats, maybe plain language and braille. Ask if there are portions of the restaurant where the lighting and sound are dimmed. These questions, I'm not asking you to ask them to make someone else feel uncomfortable. But as soon as that person hangs up the phone, they will go straight to their manager, echo these questions, and ask for answers. The more of us that ask these questions and choose to visit places that prioritize access, the quicker our world will change. But don't just flex your advocacy skills at home. Do it in work too. Encourage your teams to create policies on accessible and equitable inclusion. If you're creating visual campaigns, maybe you could create a quota that 15% of models, participants, production team must be disabled. Or you could create a proposal that all video content must be captioned. These are just 2 simple examples, but with policy, this change becomes everyone's responsibility. And it's a common objective that then feels tangible and attainable. As the policy begins to create wins that are measurable and perhaps even profitable, the culture shifts. And we evolve our practice from advocating and designing for disabled people to designing with them. How many disabled people are in your company? Is there a culture where they feel proud and safe to disclose a disability? Do you hire people from the same universities? From the same recruiters? Do you ask if potential interviewees have any accessibility requirements? Do you offer flexible working hours and healthcare? These cultural changes add value to all of our experiences. But this takes time and it doesn't happen overnight, don't worry. And perhaps you need help from a disability consultant. I know a really good one. But after we change culture, the final step is system, which is short for systemic change, which occurs when we realize that every issue is a disability issue. And that when we design with disabled people, we make our places, spaces, products, campaigns, stories, and world more creative, innovative, equal, and accessible. So, I want to invite you to build a world with me.